Welcome back to our virtual pilgrimage of Bella Roma. Still just Rome.
Just normal Rome.
Yeah. So we've talked in the past before about how there are 4 major basilicas in the entire world. There are normal basilicas all over the place.
There's 2 in Des Moines alone.
They're a dime a dozen, but there are only 4 major basilicas. And we've already talked about 2 of them, St. Peter's and St. John Lateran. Pray for us. Today, we're going to talk about the remaining 2 major basilicas in the city of Rome, and we'll start with the Basilica of St. Mary Major, obviously dedicated to St. Mary Major? St. Mary Major?
What did Mary major in?
Being the mother of God, I guess. So anyway, St. Mary was a major deal, and there's a basilica dedicated in her honor. Now, the reason it's built there, according to story, is that it was a site of a miraculous snowing occurrence in the city of Rome. What would be so miraculous about that, Casey?
Well, it only really snows in Rome once every 10 years or so.
That's right. And this particular occurrence happened in August when it's crazy hot in Rome. 90 degrees, sometimes 100-degree humid weather. The Romans even get out of town during the whole month of August.
The sidewalk literally melts.
It's unbelievable. But on this particular August, there was a significant amount of snow on a hill, and that miraculous event became the site of St. Mary Major Basilica because of that miraculous event. Now, truth be told, historically, there isn't a whole lot of evidence for this actually happening, but as the Italians say, even if it didn't really happen, it should have happened. So, beautiful church. We go inside the church to see some more awesome stuff. Casey, what's the most awesome part of really any church?
I'd have to say probably the altar.
That's right, and it's no different with St. Mary Major. Right underneath the altar is one of the most holy and cool relics in the whole city of Rome, and it's a part of the manger that Jesus was laid in Bethlehem. There's a chunk of wood that they have from that manger, and underneath the altar there's actually steps that go down there so you can pray down there. It's pretty amazing to contemplate the fact that this was what Jesus was laid in. And sometimes we treat Jesus' birth and the whole Bethlehem story as some nice fairy tale. But to go down there and actually see the chunk of wood of the manger reminds us that this actually happened. God actually became one of us and was laid in a manger. Another neat connection, especially with where it's at, is a manger would have been a feeding trough, probably for animals. And right above this manger in St. Mary Major Basilica is another feeding area, the altar, where we feed on the body and blood of Christ. So right there in the middle of it, you have a connection between Jesus' birth to come to feed us spiritually, to feed us with himself, and right above it, the altar where we are actually fed at Mass. This area underneath the altar actually has a name. It's called the Confessio. Casey, can you tell us more about what a Confessio is?
Well, Confessio, it's right there in the name. It sounds a lot like confession, making a confession of faith. Oftentimes we kind of associate that with a martyr, someone who dies for Christ, dies for their faith, to show us that there is something more, a greater reality. In fact, underneath a lot of our altars, we have a bone or a relic or something of a martyr. If you look at the cathedral in Dubuque, we have one there, or other churches. They're all around. So, confessios are kind of all over the place, but they're also at St. Paul outside the wall, the last basilica we have to talk about. And I'll give you 2 guesses. The first one doesn't count. Who's underneath the altar at St. Paul outside the wall?
I bet it's St. Paul.
Yeah, darn right it is. St. Paul outside the wall, ironically not really outside the walls anymore, but it used to be, is a beautiful and the last basilica that we have to talk about with these papal major basilicas. It's the second biggest church in all of Rome, so it's ginormous as well, and it's this huge, spacious place. But down beneath the altar are the bones of St. Paul and the chains that held him prisoner in Rome. In Rome, of course, he was executed for being a Christian, for spreading the faith. And we know that as Catholics, it's not just about Peter. It's also about Paul. And their joint ministry, their joint apostleship in founding the Church of Rome is why the Pope has such a special position in the Church, that he has double apostolic lineage, that he comes not only from Peter, but also from Paul. And so all around St. Paul, you see these mosaic portraits of every pope that has ever been. And it goes all the way back from Peter, all the way to Francis today.
pretty amazing to see the unbroken line from Peter, from Jesus himself, all the way up to Pope Francis today. And they always illuminate the Pope that's alive now, or the Pope that's in the papacy now. And you can trace it. You can go from Pope Francis to Benedict, John Paul II, all the way back, all around the church. It goes around kind of twice in two different sections, and you get all the way back to Peter. So pretty amazing.
Yeah, there's only about 6 spots left, so we'll figure out what they do at the end of that. But the other coolest thing, I think the coolest thing about St. Paul outside the wall is really the apse. That's a fancy word for saying it's the round part of the church behind the altar. And up there, there's this huge mosaic of Christ, and he's sitting enthroned. And you have like the apostles up there, the evangelists, and all these great figures, and they're huge, they're enormous. And right at Jesus's foot, you see a tiny, tiny little man who's knelt over on all fours, and he's just kissing the feet of Jesus. That's Pope Honorius, the one who built St. Paul outside the wall. And he did that as a sign of his position, not as a sign of a ruler, not as a sign of somebody who gets to dictate to the church what we're going to do, but as a servant of the servants of God. It's truly a witness about just how deeply our Pope isn't called to be these grand, ginormous figures like Christ or the evangelists are, but rather a mere servant, just like you, just like me. And it's a really beautiful testament today to Pope Francis's servitude. Mm-hmm.
It's pretty amazing to think when we think about artwork being done. Usually if an artist depicts themselves or commissions something, they want themselves looking good. Even in the modern day, you look at somebody's Facebook page, they're going to try to make themselves look good. But here's Honorius having a mosaic done, and he's making himself small, little, a servant. That humility is pretty incredible and pretty countercultural to usually how people depict themselves in artwork.
There's 2 great lessons that we can learn from 2 of our major basilicas. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about one of the greatest places in all of Christendom, the catacombs. So join us then, and we'll see ya.
It's pretty fun. Dead people.